Okay, so this is all about chapter 8 in your book, The Research to Support the Trait Approach. So we're going to start first with talking about what's called the need for achievement. So the need for achievement is essentially as it sounds, and we talked about this a little bit already when we talked about Henry Murray's theory of personality. But it's basically this desire to be able to accomplish something difficult, to be able to essentially meet some kind of challenge, some kind of obstacle to attain some type of standard, typically that you have set for yourself. So high need for achievement people take moderate risks where they'll be more likely to be able to succeed. They generally enjoy their work. They find it challenging and stimulating, and that translates into a lot of energy and enthusiasm for their work. They tend not to like jobs that are routine, so jobs that are boring, jobs that are predictable, because there's not really a lot of new challenges that are inherent in those types of jobs. They also prefer jobs where they are personally responsible for whatever the outcome is. So that means then that if my achievement depends on my own performance, well, I can directly control that. And they also want that concrete feedback about their performance. They want to know how they did. They want to be able to see, did I achieve the goal or not? And what should I do differently the next time? So factors that are predicting this particular behavior. So there are actually some parenting practices that are associated with this high need for achievement in children. One of the things that parents can do is, as opposed to praising the outcome of a child's behavior, instead praise the amount of effort that a child puts in. So praise the effort over the outcome, and that's one way that you can instill this need for achievement in children. Additionally, no surprises here that this high need for achievement tends to relate to success in the business world for both men and women, and that typically results in these higher economic prosperity for people who have a high need for achievement. Additionally, in terms of gender differences, men tend to see success in terms of external standards. So maybe meeting other people's, or maybe getting some kind of like concrete job promotion or something like that. Whereas for women, they tend to rely more on internal definitions of success. So their own kind of personally set goals for achievement. Additionally, too, in individualistic cultures, the personal accomplishments are strongly related to this achievement orientation here. And then in collective cultures, though, the difference is that the need for achievement is typically defined in terms of how well do I cooperate, and then how much does my group accomplish. So a little bit different there. So you can see then that this high level might actually interfere with effective performance. Let's say if I am in an individualistic culture, I have a high need for achievement. That might translate into I have a very difficult time working in groups. And so that could be very problematic in the workplace. All right, so this achievement goal framework then provides essentially targets that people aspire to in these achievement types of situations. So we have two different types of categories here, two different types of goals, mastery and performance. So with a mastery goal, you are essentially trying to master, or basically like learn all that you can about a particular type of field, right? And that's your motivation for continuing in that field. So when we see mastery goals as kind of the guiding framework for students in particular, so students who adopt a mastery goal, let's say for a course, they tend to choose more challenging tasks within the course, and they're oftentimes more interested in their classes. Additionally, they retain the information and skills that they have learned in their classes for longer compared to people who have performance goals only. And they're also more likely then to be able to share information with other people and work with other people to achieve superordinate goals or common goals that are shared by many people who are members in a group. Let's contrast that then with performance goals. So with performance goals, you basically are looking at how does my performance compare to other people. So my goal, if I am adopting this performance framework, is that I want to essentially like outshine other people and do better than other people. So with a performance goal then, this really relates to how well people perform in groups, because if I have a performance framework here, I tend to see other people as competition as opposed to maybe a resource for me. So the advantages of this particular approach are relatively limited, and they might actually be related to that type A kind of personality that we saw before. So remember when we talked about type A personality, that I'm basically viewing other people all the time as kind of my competition. I need to do better than them, and that could be related to these performance goals. All right, so let's talk about social anxiety. All right, so with social anxiety, this is clearly related to social interactions. So social anxiety is basically feeling kind of awkward or nervous in situations where I have to interact with other people. I'm concerned about other people's perception of me. I feel like other people are kind of watching me, judging me, evaluating my performance. And so that leads then to kind of ineffective social interactions. So I might stumble over my words. I might think that I'm saying the wrong thing, and other people are really, really hypercritical of me. And that might lead to me being ashamed and embarrassed in social situations. So then outcomes here could be increased physiological arousal. So if I'm feeling anxious, that means my autonomic nervous system is kicking in that fight or flight response. So my heart starts beating faster, my pupils dilate, I start sweating, and then that interferes with my ability to concentrate and leads to just being generally nervous, right? And very anxious whenever I think that other people are evaluating me. All right, so the emotions then related to this particular trait approach. So we'll talk about kind of positive versus negative emotions. But first, just some basic background here on emotions in general. So emotions are relatively stable personality characteristics in these three areas that are listed here. So first, what we'll call affectivity. So essentially, like how much do you experience positive versus negative emotions? And then also, what's the intensity of those particular emotions? So how strong are your positive emotions? How strong are your negative emotions? And then how expressive are you? So how easy is it, for example, maybe for someone to look at your face and have a pretty good idea of the particular emotion that you are feeling? So with these emotions, then, we see that there are some pretty characteristic differences in terms of how people express positive versus negative emotions. We can predict these with a pretty reasonable tendency. So if you show a high degree of positive emotion in childhood, you're likely to continue showing that high degree of positive emotion later on down the line. Same also holds for negative emotion. So these individual differences in the positive and negative affect actually predict a number of different kinds of behaviors. So one behavior that is consistently associated with a high degree of positive affect is social activity. So generally speaking, people who show higher degrees of positive affect are more likely to be engaging in social interaction. So high positive affect people act in ways that most people find attractive. So they tend to show a lot of smiling. They tend to ask questions of other people, be talkative, be friendly, tend to be happy, enthusiastic, and also very attentive when interacting with other people. On the other side, on the high scores on negative affect, high degree of neuroticism relate to psychological stress. So this actually relates to a diverse list of emotional problems, which we've talked about in the last chapter. People who show this high degree of positive affect, generally speaking, are reporting more health problems and more just general difficulty experiencing stress. Additionally, there is some individual variation in terms of the intensity. So there's a difference between high and low intensity people in terms of how they react to events. So for example, if we look at happiness as a high versus low intensity kind of emotional experience, so high intensity people, for them, happiness tends to mean a kind of exhilarating exuberance. So happiness is exhilarating, it's enlivening, it's energizing, compared to someone who is maybe more of a low intensity person, where happiness takes the form of a kind of calm and enduring maybe sense of contentment. So it could be I'm by myself, I'm very relaxed, and that is happiness for me. Additionally, if we look at the expressiveness, so people's outward displays of emotion, that women tend to be more expressive on the whole compared to men. They're also better at reading emotions in other people's faces. All right, so let's talk about optimism. So our last topic here. So optimism, we're going to talk here about something called dispositional optimism, which is basically the extent to which people adopt this positive viewpoint in life. So optimists on the whole generally deal with adverse situations better than pessimists do. Optimists and pessimists also use generally very different kinds of coping strategies, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Optimists are generally in better physical health compared to pessimists. So they'll find social support, which leads to better health overall. And the kinds of attitudes that they adopt actually lead to better health as well. So optimists then are better in terms of goal setting. So they set higher goals for themselves, and they also tend to prioritize their goals better compared to pessimists. They also believe that they can actually achieve the goals that they have set. So this is pretty important in terms of motivating ourselves to achieve the goals. And they don't let a failure get them down. So it's like, okay, maybe I didn't do super well here. Okay, I'm going to pick back up and start over again. So in terms of the coping strategies that you see here, so the dark blue bar relates to optimists, the light blue bar relates to pessimists. So optimists, generally speaking, are using more kind of approach strategies where they're actively kind of trying to seek out how to deal with my problem, compared to pessimists who are more likely to use what we'll call avoidance strategies. So strategies where I almost pretend like the problem doesn't exist. Well, we know from research on stress and coping that avoidance strategies are generally not effective coping strategies. The problem is still there, right? We're just kind of temporarily avoiding our interaction with it. So generally speaking, the active or like the problem-focused coping strategies, generally speaking, are going to be a much better fit, especially when the problem is solvable. So that's going to relate then to overall physical health and also psychological health too.